Please give a warm welcome to producer Peter Cron, producer Anthony Bregman, co-songwriter Gary Clark, and writer-director John Carney. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Such a uplifting, wonderful film. Exactly what we needed during these times. John, I've seen this film a couple of times. I mentioned the idea that the main character has to choose between her son and then what she sees in a Zoom screen and what that represents, this sort of pipe dream. Can you talk to us about arriving to that situation?
Well, I guess it ties in with the general thing that I feel like I'm doing now, which is trying to move away from the traditional musical story, which is pretty much romantic love. Mm-hmm. You know, boy meets boy, girl meets boy, they get married, they sing. That's kind of the traditional thing. And I've done that a few times in other films, and I thought it would be challenging and interesting to use the tone of the traditional music, but to try and tell a more platonic story, so that the A story in it was not the romantic story, but a familial relationship, and see if I could kind of have the same effect of other musicals that I've done.
But the idea of, like, I mean, we all were during COVID staring at screens and living in a virtual way. Was that sort of an inspiration?
That's part of it. I wanted to sort of see to sort of see how much truth there was in the idea of, could you fall in love with somebody on a screen? I'm not sure if I've answered it. I don't have the answers. I'm sure you could, but it was interesting to me to sort of see how far I could go with that and never have them meet.
Gary, how can you tell us about developing the music for the movie with John? It is so, I mean, the gamut that you have to do in this film, you do, kids rapping, and then you have club music, and then you have folk songs. Can you tell us about the challenge?
Yeah, it was definitely the broadest range of stuff that we've ever tackled in one thing, but it was all kind of there in the script. So when John asked me to get on board, read the script, we did a big long Zoom and just walked through it, and pretty much everything, all the bits of music that you see there were referenced in the script. So it was really just a matter of trying to create it. I've kind of luckily come from a background of quite broad, worked in a lot of different musical styles, so it was fun for me from that perspective. But the songs, the heart of the songs, were kind of in the script, and that's what we were looking to bring out, singing your praises, pun intended, the fact that, like, a song like Meet in the Middle, it starts as a wannabe songwriter or somebody who is not achieved success, and then all of a sudden you have the voice of somebody who's an amateur, and that we feel and hear in the song. Was that a challenge for you too? It definitely was, and that song was probably the biggest journey in terms of finding that song and getting the tone correct. That was, I would say, the toughest one. We went through a few different iterations of that song, and one of the big breakthroughs was pretty close to when the shoot was going to happen, so it was right up against the wire. John and Eve were talking, and Eve had said that she had some opinions about what she thought Flora would sing or what she wouldn't sing or say, actually, lyrically. And similarly, Joe had some thoughts as well. And John just bravely said, let's all just go into the studio and thrash this out and figure it out. So we kind of had the music, and we had a lot of the melodies and stuff. We didn't have the chorus at that point. We had a kind of vague idea for it. And then we just went into the studio in Dublin on a weekend. We had one day, and we walked through the song they were working in character and bringing that to the party. And by the end of the day, we had what you hear there.
Anthony, if you don't mind telling me about shooting the Zoom sequences, where, you know, for a lot of the movie, we have the, you know, him in a Zoom box, whatever, in a computer, and her in the real world. Can you tell us about how you guys went about shooting those scenes?
Sure. You know, shooting a Zoom sequence is actually a little more complicated than having a Zoom session, because because when you're shooting, what we wanted from the beginning was to maintain the authentic connection between the two characters, and the easiest way to do that is the easiest way to shoot a Zoom sequence without having the characters actually respond to each other moment to moment is to just shoot one side, and then you put it into the computer, and then you shoot the other side, and then you have responding to it. But then they can't play off of each other, and you kind of lose that sense of connection. And the whole movie is built on connection and on trying to use Zoom and computers and technology to actually connect people. So we felt that we really needed to do it right. We needed both sides to happen at the same point. So it means having two cameras. We had a large stage. We had Eve's apartment set up on one side of the stage, and then Joe's studio in Los Angeles set up on another side of the stage. And we shot some footage of the mountains with the kind of trees swaying in the breeze. And then we played that footage on a screen behind the window, and then shot the sequence with two different camera crews, because you can't use the image from the computer. It won't hold up on something, on a big screen. So you have to have a separate camera shoot that. And then you have to make sure that the sound doesn't leak from one set to another, because it'll create an echo. So you have to take the entire set and surround it with thick foam to completely soundproof it. And that's what we did.
But Gordon-Levitt was not in California. He was actually
he was in Dublin, on the same stage, 50 feet away from Eve, in a soundproof box with an image from California behind him being projected, and a set that looks like California that's built around him.
And why did you? Maybe that's a question for John. Why did you have to have Gordon-Levitt in Dublin when he's remote? Maybe it's just it was easier.
He wanted to bring his wife to Dublin so she could look up her family heritage. No, it's kind of it's the magic of cinema. It's the simplest of things requires all this thought and technology and stuff to get, and my father would always be coming to our film sets, and saying, "Why do you need all this?" And I'm like, "So you can sit down." And they said, "But did they have that with 12 Angry Men?" And they're like, "Well, they didn't,
They had something in 12 Angry Men that was more complicated than 12 people sitting around a table arguing. And I think we, the idea for this movie from John came out during a time when we all, and you all as well, like everybody went from never using Zoom to always using Zoom. And that was a new thing for us. And I think we very quickly found out that Zoom doesn't, on one hand, it connects people, but on the other hand, and the reason why we're still using Zoom now and there's no pandemic anymore, is because it separates people. And there's definitely a downside to that effect. And what this story shows, and one of the reasons why it seems affecting, is because it shows another angle to how people can actually connect. So and that needs to kind of be suffusing how we're making the movie. And if we didn't have something that was actually connecting these two individuals in the movie, if we didn't have it as part of the production, we probably wouldn't have gotten the kind of real authentic connection that you see on screen.
Peter, I mentioned to John outside that one of the great things about the film is that there is such specificity to the location and to Dublin. But at the same time, we achieved this universality while watching the film. Can you tell us about the importance of shooting in Dublin and incorporating the specificity of Dublin?
Yeah, I mean, we shot, a lot of it, pretty much all the film on location. We shot some stuff on stages, but everything else that you see was in and around Dublin and kind of in and around a 4-block radius of Dublin, around the courthouse that you see at the end. And, their flats, it's the Chancery Flats, a lot of the people that actually lived there are in that scene as extras and in the background who lived in that house. And so, I mean, John can probably speak to it most eloquently, having grown up and living in Dublin, but, it was such a character of the movie that was so essential to, creating that world and making it feel like it actually was the authentic, world that Eve is living in.
John, we've seen all your movies. There is a realism to it. In this movie, you dip into fantasy. In the scene, meet in the middle. Can you tell us about that moment and how it came about and shooting it?
Well, so that's a kind of an interesting point in both the script writing stage and then the technical thing of trying to get what we had written. The basic idea, I think, there was. And it's very interesting from the point of view of a filmmaker or a writer. You want to do things so that the audience feel this director and the producer, the team that made this film are doing this correctly. They're not just doing something because they want it that way. So it felt to me, while I want the characters to connect, I want to get the audience very comfortable with the limitations of Zoom. So there are 2 very long scenes in which they're talking to each other through screens. And there's a point, I think, at which modern audiences are grateful for the director observing that and doing it properly, and bored. And I think that as a writer, I remember distinctly being very happy with the first 2 scenes and going, this is really good, I'm disciplining myself to the rules that I've created. But there came a point at which it was necessary to break out of that. And in fact, it would have been bad filmmaking to go on doing cut to the screen, cut back to her, cut to the screen. Something in the script was telling me now, okay, now as a filmmaker, you have to up the ante here a little bit. You've done it right, and it was good that it didn't happen immediately, or you broke the 4th wall really quickly or whatever. But there's also now a point at which you have to cinematically make this a pleasurable experience. And it struck me that I had just enough license to say, if I was on a Zoom call with somebody and I started to fall for them, or I think the screen might just fall away a little bit. And I think if you really, truly were connecting with somebody, or somebody's really teaching you something, I think it would be as good as being in the room with them. And particularly, actually, sometimes I go into my room after dinner and I'll Google some chord structure I want to learn, and I'll find a YouTube clip. And at the beginning, it's a bit stilted because I'm looking at a screen and I'm learning from. But when you get into the music and the connection between this person teaching you how to do something, you're kind of with them in the room. So I felt like that was just the right amount of license to take.
And did you find this during editing, or this is exactly how you envision it?
No, I found it in the script. I found the first scene to be very funny when they're talking, and the awkwardness of the screen sets up their awkwardness, and she's flirting with him, and he's trying to figure out who she is, and they close the laptops on each other, and then the next time they open the laptop, and it's a little easier, and then the third time the laptop disappears, and he's there in the room. The script sort of told me to do that,
Yeah. Gary, the lyrics and the songs are so organic to each character, to each of their voices. How did you work with the actors, and did they help you develop the lyrics, or it was all you and John?
On the song On the Rooftop, Meet in the Middle, we worked with Eve and Joe on that, and on High Life, Eve helped us with the lyrics on that as well. But I would say that, again, I keep coming back to this, a lot of it's in the script. A lot of it comes from the script. Their stories are there. And that's what you want to be kind of inspired by. but at the same time, you don't want to be too on the nose with it. But that's really what you're trying to do.
Anthony, I want to ask you about my favorite moment in the movie is the Johnny Mitchell sequence. It feels so magical, but at the same time so simple. You know, can you tell us about that sequence?
Sure. It's originally there was another song in there by John Martin, and over the course of editing, we changed it to Joni Mitchell for a number of like narrative and character reasons. And originally there was also a big visual effect that was happening in that movie, in that scene.
Would you mind telling us?
The big visual effect was she clicks it on, Joni Mitchell starts to play, she goes over to the sink, she starts washing, and then it starts affecting her, and then she turns around, and then we see as she looks at the back of the computer, and she has some dishes and a glass and silverware that she's holding in her hand from washing, and she drops it, and you watch the silverware kind of fall down and then not hit the ground, just fall and then stop, and then because time is kind of stopping for her, and then she steps over them, goes to the computer and sees the thing. And we shot elements for that while we were shooting that scene, and then found that, you know, what we found time and time again in shooting and editing the movie is that Eve brought an incredible connection to the story, and that really the visual effect was watching her. And we dropped everything else, and nobody misses it, and nobody outside of this room, even very few people even know about it, because really the visual effect is on her face and watching her eyes well up and one tear come down, and that is enough for us to see what the effect of Joni Mitchell is. We don't have to create a means to symbolize time stopping still. We can watch it on her face.
Amazing. Peter, tell us about casting Eve, and then Oren, who plays her son, never acted in a movie before.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's funny, it's two very different processes. You know, John and Eve Zoomed a few months before we made the movie. It was a very quick timeline in making the film, and I remember Eve was like, let me tell you all the reasons why I'm perfect for this part. And, you know, afterwards, I remember John texted us and was basically like, she is it. There was no further search afterwards. And, you know, with Oren, we had been looking for a while, and we had looked at a lot of tapes, and it was getting very close to shooting, kind of nerve-wrackingly close, one might say. And then we got his tape, and it was actually kind of a very similar experience. It was like, oh, this is the kid, it's him. And there was, again, kind of like no real conversation after that. So it was once we found Eve and Oren, there was no further searching. It was like, oh, we found our people.
Actually, my next question is to both John and Gary. What I love about the songs and the songs moments in this movie is that there's a lot of imperfection, but those imperfections is what makes it like thrilling. Like I'm thinking about the closing scene where used to Hollywood, you know, it would be so polished and so perfect. But this, I was deeply moved by hearing that there was imperfections in the music.
Yeah, I mean, I could talk about that all day, because it's what interests me more and more as I get older is the idea that we've kind of heard the narrative of, you know, write a song, the lyrics are amazing, the song is amazing, you win a Grammy, and it's rags to riches. And that's the end of most musicals that I watched when I was a kid, and from the 30s and 40s and 50s was generally a big crowd-pleasing moment where the person's a genius and the song is Singing in the Rain, or, you know, whatever fantastic song, New York, New York at the end, and it's and that's great, and I love those movies, and I've made a couple of movies that have, you know, completely obviously great songs in them. But I would like to continue my career of making musical films, but I don't want to just keep doing that thing. And also I think it's a very limiting worldview of music, that the only way to measure music is by success or winning. And we're living this weird time of The Voice and the X Factor and of young people being validated by adults and winning things. And that's the only criteria, is, you know, how many likes do you have? How big is your following? And that's kind of it. And we forget the various reasons for why we got into music, why we love music, what music can do for people. When we look through that one narrow lens and we're told that you have to fill this arena or you have to do this, it really starts to limit the possibilities of people saying, well, I'm not, you know, simply in like, I don't think you'd have punk rock in that, because punk rock is never going to win the X Factor, right? Because it's noisy and anarchic and all of that, but it's valid music. And we forget that. So the stories that I'd like to continue to tell are, you know, myriad reasons for why we get into music. And I think this would have been crazy if she wrote, you know, an absolute bona fide banger at the end. You'd be like, hang on a second, now you're asking us to. So I think I have to be true to that idea. But it's no less joyful. So you kind of get your cake and eat it. You remain true to the sort of premise of the movie, and my belief and Gary's belief, I think, and all of our beliefs, which is that, you know, music is many, many, many things for many, many different people. And but you still do, you know, have a joyful moment of where a character takes a risk and does something outside her comfort zone and has a certain small, begrudging Dublin success at the end.
It's quite interesting because John has to have a... Oh, sorry. John has to have a songwriter's eye on it, but also he always keeps a filmmaker's eye on it as well. So if we do get too close to it not feeling believable, he will notice it and feel it and say to me, this is feeling a little bit too neat or tidy or whatever that is, polished, you know.
And also that's the little girl or guy breaking into song and everybody going, what? That's TV now. That is The Voice. And yeah, like, I don't know how many times I've seen that clip where somebody comes out and they don't look like a pop star and they sing and it's like, oh my God, what you did today is blown. All you need to do is follow your dream. And I don't think we're gonna get, you know, like, think of the bands from the 70s and 80s that, you know, would have failed miserably at a talent contest, thank God. Yeah. Anyway, you know what I mean.
Yeah, I think one of the most moving things in the movie is that the distance that Flora goes from the beginning of the movie to the end of the movie, which is an enormous emotional difference. And she's saved, like, her relationship with her son and has found a way to connect and to kind of, you know, make the right choices for him and that. And at the same time, the way that John scripted and then shot it is that she's only physically gone about a block and a half. Because if you look at the pub where they have the song contest, and you see it twice in the movie, once at night, and then once during the day before when she kind of visits it for the first time, and you look down that street, that's Chancery Flats, right across a tiny little park. So she's only gone a block and a half in actual distance, but at the same time, she's done an enormous trip in emotional distance, and that is the magic, I think, of the movie, is to see that she didn't have to become Lady Gaga in order to have the most happy of all endings.
Yeah. Both to Gary and John, we've seen movies in the past where, you know, we know that music changes lives, and we see this in this film. But there was something very unique about your film that I found deeply moving, is that music as something you can pass on to somebody, as a token, as a present. You know, can you talk about that?
Yeah,
I mean, I've had that happen to me so many times where somebody's played me a record. I always tell this story, like 3 of the most influential records that shaped my young musical life were given to me for free by people who didn't like them. You know, my cousin just gave me Stevie Wonder's Inner Visions and David Bowie's Hunky Dory on the same day. And then I had a girlfriend when I was about 14, and after school went up to her house, and her brother threw this record at me across the room, and he goes, "You'll like this shit." And it was Steely Dan's Asia, which changed my life, you know. So there's those, and then there's also, I'm old enough to remember when people would share mixtapes, you know, you'd make your friend like a cassette with a bunch of, I remember somebody giving me like basically a history of reggae in this one cassette tape, you know. So there's that, and there's many other examples, but yeah, it can be an amazing gift to give people.
Yeah, and like metaphorically a gift, but also physically, you know, a gift in terms of this movie. Obviously, this is somebody who's strapped for cash, doesn't have a lot of money, never had an instrument in the house. And I remember during the pandemic thinking about things that I might do to pass the time, you know, and like maybe I'll learn some new instrument or how to paint or... I don't think I did any of them actually. Now that I think of it, Matt Pilates. I have 1% better core than I had before the pandemic. But I remember reading a piece by David Brooks in the New York Times about, I don't know what it was, but it was about like a violin or, you know, how great it would be, and it really chimed with me the idea of, God, can you imagine you discovered something new. And my mother, like Flora in this film, is a very different woman, but she gave me a guitar when I was 13 or 14. And, you know, I wasn't a sports guy. I wasn't so I wasn't playing football or rugby. I didn't have a big gang of friends. I wasn't academically very bright, much to her shock. But, and then I think I came home one day and it was like music, and I was getting into music, and I asked her for a bass guitar, and she delivered on that in the way that my father wouldn't. Being from Mayo, he was like, whenever I asked him for anything, he was like, borrow it first and see what it's like. And that sort of was dispiriting to a 13 or 14-year-old. You know, when you believe in yourself so much, I'm going to be like a BMX guy, you know, you need to do it. You can't borrow one. You have to fully throw yourself into that role, or that, you know what I mean? And I was a musician. Suddenly, with no train, you know, I decided, and my mother kind of, I don't know what she did, and that's kind of what the movie, in a way, was born out of as well, was trying to imagine what was it like for my mother to have this skinny, you know, pain in the ass son come in and say, I really want to be a bass player, and I listen to music and it connects with me, but I don't know what it's like to hold that instrument, you know, and I've played one in the shop and there's one there. For her to like take that, and I'm a father now, so my kid is always asking me for stuff, and I have to make a call on which ones I'm gonna go for and which ones you're not, because you can't buy them everything. Well, unless you're like a big celebrity or something like that. But you know, you have to know when to say no, and you have to look in their eyes and know this is important. And I remember very distinctly, like. And actually, it's funny, like a bicycle, I wanted this BMX one Christmas when I was 12. And I lobbied for it like crazy. And my dad was like, no, no, no. And then on Christmas Day, or Christmas Eve, I looked out my bedroom window and I heard some noise or something like this, you know? And I've been lobbying for a BMX for like half a year, and from my dad, who I love, by the way. But and I saw the garage door open and close, and I was like, oh my God. And I snuck down in my pajamas to the garage next to our house, or at the bottom of our house, and I opened up and it was like a Steven Spielberg moment. The thing came up. It wasn't electric, I was pushing it up. And it comes up, and I turned on, there was one naked light bulb, and there's a BMX on its stand, sitting there red with yellow pads. And I'm like, oh my God, and I close it, go back to bed, and I can't sleep. Next morning, we're doing the presents, and I'm getting shitty presents off my mum and dad. And I'm like, I know, because you've got the big one for last. And then, it's getting on in the present giving ceremony, and it's like, I'm not being led out to the garage here, what? And then like they're wrapping up the Christmas stuff, and it's like, this is ending, and I've got a jumper and an orange from my parents or whatever, whatever shit we got in the 80s. And I see my neighbor cycling past, Simon Rooney, going past the window on the BMX. Oh, shit. And it was my neighbor's parents had come into my dad, and said, can we hide the BMX from our friend? And my stupid father was like, of course, yeah, sure, nobody here wants a BMX. And but my mother, and actually just to sort of finish that story, because this has nothing to do with Flora and Son, but seeing as we're here, I told that story to a friend of mine, Kirsten Sheridan, who's Jim Sheridan's daughter, and we made some stuff together and we're writing, we shared an office. And I told her that story, and you know, she, being who she is, and enormously emotional, she had a little lump in her throat, and she's like, oh, you poor, I can just see you. Oh, John, give me a hug. But then that Christmas, I went into my office, you know, before the break, there's a BMX there. From Kirsten, and I like wept, and Kirsten was like, I made your dream come true. And so then I
Broke your leg on it.
then I went, I pissed around, and it was like, and then myself and my partner finally, after months and months and years of IVF, finally have a little boy. And I was like, oh, I can't wait to give him the BMX. Like, this is perfect. This is like a brilliant story. And he's 3, he's 4, he's 5. It's time I can give him the BMX. And he's like 7 years old. I bring him over to my parents' house, and I'm like, come on in, Lou. And I open the thing, and he looks at me, doesn't give a fuck. He's like, so? I'm like, the story I tell, this, do you see it completes the cycle? But anyway, that's an aside. But my mother did buy me the guitar and put the money down. And the money is the important thing for me, even though it seems, I don't mean that literally, I mean the fact that she, you know, that it was an investment in me.
Correct.
And just because you were talking about gifts, when a parent pays for a gift, it means they worked for the money to get the gift for you. They're not getting anything back. And that was, changed my life for my mother doing that. I really, really gave me she kind of put it to me, and I went and I learned the bass, and I became good at it because she had spent the money on it. And I never thanked her, because 14-year-old boys, as anybody in the audience knows, are like, they don't even say thanks. Yeah. So this is thanks to my mother now, finally. She can
After
go.
all these years. Peter, Eve is not a singer, and she hadn't sung. And then Oren, also not a musician. You know, tell us about casting them, knowing that, and their evolution during filming.
I mean, Oren particularly, like, you know, Oren has no musical background, and we gave him, you know, garage band lessons and all of it. And by the end, he kind of got the bug a little bit. You know, and Eve, Eve is not, I wish she wouldn't call herself a singer, but she can sing. And Joe, honestly, was the one that had the most musical talent and was the most comfortable with it. But they all, I think, evolved a little bit as musicians through the course of it.
Gordon knew how to play the guitar before.
Yeah, Joseph Gordon-Levitt knew how to play the guitar, and I think he had always wanted to do this kind of musical. Like, you know, like us, wasn't super drawn to the, you know, singing and dancing kind of musical as much as this kind of movie that is imbued with music, but is not, you know, a true out-and-out musical.
And Anthony, having produced most of John's films, can you, putting you on the spot, talk about you witnessing the evolution of John's career?
You know, you know, John, I think, is the great thing about John's movies, which he writes and directs, is that there is a tension within John of wanting to think of the movie kind of one force going into each of the scripts in the movies, of it being very dark and very, you know, very, very harsh, and kind of has some of the reality of life in it that is like inevitably disappointing. And John's own character and his own, he has a very big heart and a real love of comedy and a real love of a good time that also is fighting within him to create a movie like this, where you have, you know, a mother who, like, you know, punches her son 3 minutes into the movie, you know, neglects him, you know, curses him, and doesn't want to have anything to do, wishes he would get kidnapped, you know, and then puts everything in her life aside in order to save him in the end. Like that only comes, it comes from really going into the harsh realities of life and really like rising up to the hope and the faith in what people can do. And that is at war in every one of John's films, and it's really satisfying to watch.
And John, last question from a theater geek. Your films have all somehow made it into theater. You know, Sing Street and Once won the Tony Best Musical. Are we going to see Flora and Son down the road?
If there's any Santa Barbarians, is that the word out there? With
Barbarians.
Barbarians who want to invest in a show.
Although we do have some barbarians here, but
yeah. I'm completely open to the idea of, and I have thought about Flora and Son as a musical. That's not my thing, so I don't know exactly to what degree something is transposable to the theater. And I was amazed at and really enjoyed the process of thinking about how Once would work in a theater world, and we did various different manifestations of that to figure out how that would work. But I don't know why they translate quite well, but we'll see. If somebody has an offer, I'm open.
Okay. Well, in the meantime, we're so honored and lucky to have you here today. Thank you so much for making it.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.